We're back with another edition of the Federalist Radio Hour. I'm Emily Jashinsky, culture editor here at the Federalist, and you can always email the show at radio@thefederalist.com. Follow us on Twitter at FDRLST. Make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel as well. Today, historic day. You can't usually use that word, but today is indeed a historic day, and I'm happy to be joined by my colleague, Christopher Bedford, senior editor at The Federalist, and by Jason Rantz, a Seattle-based talk show host. Jason, thank you so much for chatting with us on this day.
Thank you for having me on this historic day. I mean, you have the perfect guest for it.
Right. It is like, so we're in DC right now, and it doesn't feel like a historic day because the streets are empty. It feels like a Saturday morning at 8 a.m., right?
I mean, so why would you come from Seattle, which I mean is a wonderful, completely fine, everything's fine in Seattle. Place like Washington, D.C., which is completely occupied by the National Guard.
Well, Capitol Hill in Seattle is occupied as well.
Well, it was.
Good.
The difference is, their National Guard in Seattle was run by Antifa lunatics, and so slightly less manpower and weaponry. The weapons usually for Antifa is. Did you see the Mighty Ducks? You remember when?
I love the Mighty Ducks.
So right when you're
Knuckle
introduced
Puck.
to the Mighty Ducks, Knuckle Puck, which of course is not a possible thing.
I tried it 1,000 times.
It doesn't work, does it? So at the beginning,
Chris.
they have no money. And so all of their uniforms are basically, they find like old yellow pages and they create defensive gear for them on the field or on the rink.
Oh, this is like an actual Antifa wannabe militia.
This is what Antifa has
This is not the real National Guard.
This is Antifa who go into like trash bins and literally take them and use it for protection.
I was hoping you'd found the liberal National Guard members because apparently Washington, D.C. Is looking for liberal National Guard members. They don't want any members of Young Americans for Freedom here. Mm-hmm. People have other extremist ties like Turning Point USA or the National Rifle Association. I mean, you can't have pro-Second Amendment National Guardsmen. So I guess the officers over the last few weeks have been combing through the guards who are here to make sure that there are no Trump supporters amongst, for example, the Montana infantry.
So find two out of the 25,000.
Jason, so how do you feel about we've already actually seen, we're taping this right now on the morning of Joe Biden's inauguration. We've already seen President Trump give his farewell address. We've seen him at Joint Base Andrews. How do you feel about the transition process as it's already transpired today? And, maybe we can juxtapose it with the context of the corporate media saying that Donald Trump was going to need to be dragged out of the White House by the military.
Well, they've got so many...
For like 2 years, they've been saying this.
The number of narratives that came out of like CNN and MSNBC and the New York Times have been so conflicting, it's ridiculous. And today and over the last week, my favorite part has been, this is another norm that he's breaking by not being there. You didn't want him there. You didn't want him at the inauguration. So let's stop pretending that this is something that you are shocked by. You are delighted by it. And of course, the question has to be, for at least from CNN's perspective, because they really changed their branding for the last 4 years. They decided to try to become MSNBC, but they did it in a way worse way. And by the way,
like a dumber way.
Well,
that's the thing. Like Rachel Maddow is pretty smart,
She's
and
smart.
The CNN cast is not as smart.
I'd rather watch MSNBC any day than CNN.
Well, because MSNBC at least is honest about what they are. They're not hiding the fact that they are the anti-Trump network and it's a progressive network. They own that.
As you're speaking, Jake Tapper is complaining to you on DMs.
Of course he is. Jake Tapper today is probably trying to figure out, was it worth throwing away my brand and my dignity? As someone who I think was respected, as sort of down the middle and at least honest.
I kind of liked him.
I liked him before at least the last couple of years. He just kind of lost it. And what is he to do? What is CNN to do at this point? You're not gonna beat MSNBC at that game if you're gonna continue to pretend that you're just a straight news network that's telling it like it is.
They just had a big story that I was reading earlier today about Kamala Harris and Joe Biden's playlists for the inauguration.
Very
I think they've got some pretty hard-hitting coverage on the incoming dogs to the White House.
3-part series. I think they're doing a documentary on it.
Yeah, I think the Washington Post, was it, that had a really cool investigative piece on Kamala's relationship with her husband and the story of the Converse sneakers, which she wore kind of terribly on a magazine cover the other day.
Well, so let's talk about this. Let's get into this. How the Trump era has changed or will continue to impact the reputations of some people, and in the eyes of the public and in their standing and their ability to influence policy and conversation in DC. I mean, the media is an obviously sort of like target-rich environment to have that conversation. But at the same time, there's the entire intelligence community. Like the Trump era has been so transformative, partially because it's exposed existing biases and problems, and also because it's sort of coaxed the worst out of so many people. Doesn't it feel like that?
It does. The question is, how much is the public actually picking up and remembering? Because, for those of us who actually work in the media and we do this for a living, so we're reading everything and we're on Twitter 24/7 and we're watching and listening, we're remembering everything. We know the double standards. We know how people have acted. Normal people don't. They're not really paying attention as closely. They pay more attention during certain parts of the news cycle than others, but they've got lives that they're more focused on. And so this idea that,
That sounds so wonderful.
It really
and it's true. We just don't ever get to experience that. I mean, we're literally on 24/7. We have to know exactly what's happening. But most people have their lives and they're picking up news in 10-minute chunks, maybe every other day. And I don't think, as much as some media members want to talk about how Trump's sort of crass attitude and brash personality changed everything for the worse, I don't know if people have picked up on that in the same way. You still have 75 million people who voted for him, who supposedly is the worst person in the history of the world. He was the second Adolf Hitler, and yet 75 million people actually went out and voted.
I remember
That's
that. I remember Hitler's farewell address, and then he swung by and said goodbye to the staff, and then he took his Air Force One to Mar-a-Lago. Actually, I think it might have been Argentina, or was it Brazil?
to Argentina.
All right, too soon. Too soon.
Okay, so this is another thing that's an element of this is the way that the military has sort of been, the reputation of the military. We talk a lot about institutions and faith in institutions, but right now we have former military people. We have things happening currently with the National Guard, for instance, as Chris just mentioned. I think the military has to be part of this conversation about institutions that transformed into a much more politicized or biased. I don't think biased is the right word. In this case, I think it's politicized.
They got politicized by President Barack Obama, who tried to turn it into a social experiment. And Joe Biden's going to do the same. Fortunately, the military
been politicized for decades, obviously, but in a different way.
In some ways, yeah. I mean, under Clinton and then after that, Democrats tried to wrest back control and say we support the troops. They kind of lost it for a little bit in Bush's second term. Under Barack Obama, they were able to pull it back. Like, we support the troops. They kind of break face every now and then. I mean, calling federal agents stormtroopers like Nancy Pelosi did when they defended the courthouse was a bit depressing. The thing about the military, it's still at least highly respected in America. But you have to understand is that by and large, the enlisted men and women are leaning right. The officer class went to Ivy Leagues. There's liberal. There's just normal liberals, absolutely, and they buy into this stuff. And hopefully, we're not going to see it really change our fighting ability.
Well, and that's obviously the concern because, every year you hope to bring in more potential soldiers. And if you do decide to lean in heavily under Biden into a more identity politics game and sort of social justice era,
it's not going to work.
You're going to turn people off because you're right. The younger folks who would join the military, they are very much to the right. They're not going to want to sign up for a social experiment, especially because right now, at least during the Obama era, it wasn't as in your face, I don't think, or at least that was my recollection of it. It was a little bit more subtle until you pointed to it. But I feel like right now, 2020 into 2021, they will make a huge media deal about it. And so it's going to be omnipresent. So when you're there and you're deciding whether or not you're going to enlist, I think there's going to be a lot of people who are going to second guess, like, is this really what I want to sign up to do?
And the incoming Secretary of Defense saying that he intends to, not confirmed yet, saying that he wants to purge the military of any racism. So, I mean,
because they're all racist. Every single.
I'm not exactly sure what that means.
Well, institutionalized racism to the left means literally every institution is built upon racism. And the only way that you can get around it is to tear it down and rebuild it in an image that you would prefer.
So no more patriarchy, no more hierarchical organization. Nope. Wow, that's going to be an interesting military.
Everyone is treated equally, and there's no longer even someone
equally
in charge.
worthless.
Equally worthless. That is called nihilism, and it's a really fun thing.
They teach it in boot camp.
Yeah. So anyway, actually, that's called Christianity. We are all equally worthless. I'm not a theologian, so please don't send us any hate mail.
Yeah, it's not quite it. That's fine.
It's fine. Anyway, so. Wow. Yeah. Please don't take that seriously. Take me neither seriously nor literally. That's the best advice I have. But I think in this conversation, we're talking about how a lot of institutions and a lot of people in the media have changed to meet a very specific moment, which is the presidency of Donald Trump. And now what I want to ask you guys is how you think that changes in the Biden presidency, right? Like, does that create a weird situation for the media? I mean, yes, it creates a weird situation for the media, but how do you think then that they'll shift to meet the moment of the Biden presidency? And do you think it positions them better or worse to meet this moment now?
I mean, if they go back to how they're supposed to do their jobs, then I think we'll all be better for it. And we will point to the last 4 years as an embarrassing blip in the world of national and local media. And that's for both sides, both right and left. I mean, there were a lot of people on the conservative side who leaned in so hard to President Trump, they built their brands on him being president.
Imagine writing a book called The Art of the Donald.
That's a great book.
It was a great book.
It is bound in pleather.
He was on my show, and we were pimping the book.
Thank you.
But obviously, you've got entire media brands that were built around his popularity and access to him and his ability to get in front of people. And so all of a sudden, you take away his Twitter account. We'll see what happens with the Facebook and the YouTube and everything else and what he ends up doing. If he goes dark, you're going to impact a lot of the conservative media outlets that relied on that for the content. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, on the left, the people who demonized him and made a career out of it for the last 4 years, they're going to have to figure out how now do they differentiate themselves from everyone else on the left. The right media right now has an easier job.
It's great. It's easy to be in opposition.
Yeah, it's so much easier. And
or at least asking questions, and there's no one on the left who's going to be asking those basic questions.
Exactly. And every time you shut down one of the questions or you completely ignore it, you turn it into a bigger story and a bigger controversy. So, Fox News and Newsmax probably do well. OAN will probably continue to do well. All of these television networks are going to be fine. It's MSNBC and CNN and sort of where the New York Times ends up pivoting, because my sense is they're going to continue to lean into the progressive because the younger staff members who write at the New York Times,
they demand
work
it
in the background at CNN, that's what they want. And the same thing goes for how, social media ends up following suit and the stories that they choose to put in front of people. I think it's just going to continue to drift further and further to the left. And I think that's bad for the
And it's going to be embarrassing to watch.
Yeah.
So it is really interesting, exactly your point, how they're going to differentiate themselves. But I've been through airports a lot during 2020, and this was and then 2021, just flying to Las Vegas. All of the airport magazines and books that had pictures of Dr. Fauci these last few weeks, because he was La Resistance, have been replaced by Kamala Harris, Joe Biden, Dr. Jill Biden, or Dr. B, as the Washington Post says she's called. I can't believe that. How about just B? All these people have replaced on the covers Dr. Fauci. So, that's merciful in one way. But even worse than dealing with the administration's policies, which I think are going to be insufferable, and they're going to lead to more anger in the working classes and more resentment and more populism, it's going to be really awkward to watch how the media handles Joe Biden. It's kind of like, I'm sure some people are into this, but it's like I feel like a peeping Tom reading some of these headlines. Like you're seeing some people engaged in something that's like really personal, but they're putting it on the cover of like the New Yorker, and it's like, whoa, that's almost pornographic, that headline. I'm uncomfortable reading it.
You get that. You should reasonably expect that for any administration for about 2 weeks, right? And then it's supposed to go away.
Barack Obama, they're putting rainbow halos.
Yeah.
Newsweek called him the first gay president, just one, not even true, and then put a rainbow halo around his head. You're like 3.
Yeah, it's fawning. Can they do that to a white, straight president? That's the question.
Bill Clinton was the first black president.
That is true.
Until Barack Obama took his title.
that movement did not exist then the way it exists now. And that's the question. And that's, it is kind of interesting because I was thinking about this the other day. You had Joe Biden, who ends up becoming the nominee and then the president. He was running against very far, far, far to the left candidates who just crashed and burned in a party that continues to listen to a fringe part of the base. And it just feels like they are not picking up on the cues that people are just not all that interested in that aspect. And I think when you look at the House races, when you nationalize elections like you do in a Senate race, Democrats have an advantage just from the sheer number of people who vote in big cities that are overwhelmingly Democratic. But when you go into the House races where Democrats were supposed to wipe the floor and pick up all of these seats, the opposite happened. They lost a whole bunch of seats because I think veering so far to the left on some of these cultural issues and the way we talk about businesses, small businesses and big businesses is just a turnoff. And so I don't understand the strategy coming from the Democratic Party right now.
No. So you're in a really democratic city.
Yes.
I love Seattle. Great beer, coffee, whatever. Beautiful place. You go up north.
DC coffee is trash.
Yeah, it is. Dunkin' Donuts is the only thing that's worth drinking. Yeah, Starbucks is bad. Dunkin', great people. The best. But it's beautiful up there in Seattle, and you've gone through some hell. I mean, there was like literally leprosy in the streets. The police are powerless. Seattle's Dying is a really interesting documentary put out by a local television station out there. And then you're here in Washington D.C. where they're trying, by the way, the same thing. They're just, you might have noticed all the tents. There were no tents last time you were here a decade ago. There are tent cities everywhere now.
So the way I talk about Seattle policies are bad Seattle policies have a tendency to spread. And we talk about it regionally because the policies that are picked up by the Seattle City Council end up getting picked up in Tacoma or Puyallup and Edmonds and Bellingham. And all of a sudden, really bad ideas, despite having no track record of actually working, end up inspiring other bad ideologues who are in positions of power to adopt them because they can put a little check mark on the list that proves that they're a progressive. And it doesn't work. And I keep asking, I always get the question, when will voters in Seattle start shifting the way they vote? Like, when will they stop putting these people in power? And, the last election for council, we thought that there was actually a shot. Amazon then got involved, put a lot of money into some of the candidates, and it turned a lot of liberals off. And they ended up putting in a more extreme council than the one previous.
Which side did Amazon get involved for?
Amazon was trying to push the more moderate Democrats who were business friendly, who were taking reasonable approaches. And, one of their targets was
Did Amazon tank them?
It did what?
And Amazon's donation tanked them?
That's what most people seem to believe, that there was a significant backlash. They didn't want to be seen as having their candidates bought and paid for by Amazon.
I just want to say, that is such an essential point because people are freaking out about what they see as fringe elements on the right. And to some extent, we don't have the language to account for the shifts in the political spectrum right now. But the left refuses because they are center in their spectrum, but they don't realize that they're actually really far to the left.
Yeah.
To them, this cultural leftism is political centrism. That's how they perceive it because it's been really forced down everybody's throat. And that's why, Biden is not flipping our cultural switch and taking things back to calm and normalcy. But this example that you're talking about right now.
I mean, Joe Biden's at St. Matthew's Cathedral right now, or was earlier today, praying. And then after that, he's going to be inaugurated. And after that, he'll send millions of dollars to South America for abortions.
Yeah, exactly.
It's just totally normal.
No, it's normal. But this is the thing. That there's a backlash against Amazon on the left. I think that's a huge element that the left doesn't understand about itself. They still don't understand, and you have a front row seat to this.
And the corporations don't understand it either.
I was just about to say that Amazon also doesn't understand because they keep contributing to candidacies that are hurting their bottom line and hurting their ability to just operate as a business. And I'm not an Amazon apologist, but I do recognize that Amazon built Seattle the way we currently know it. I live in South Lake Union, which is a neighborhood that did not exist.
The good
before
way
Amazon.
we know it now, or the bad way we know it now?
That normal people, reasonable people would look at and say, this is good. We have more business. We have a thriving economy. We have restaurants and coffee shops that didn't exist before that create jobs. Yes, we also have a higher cost of living, but I would not blame Amazon for that. It turns out Amazon pays people really, really well. Landlords understood that they can charge higher rents. We have a council that decided we're going to cap the amount of apartment buildings that go up. We're not going to let you build too high. So what they ended up doing was capping the supply when demand was very clearly on the incline. So of course the rents are going to go up. Then they go ahead and blame Amazon.
The rent's too damn high.
The rent is too damn high. But obviously, that is bad management from a city level. I don't blame Amazon for that. They've got issues. I don't blame them for that. I don't blame them for traffic in a city.
They're a global evil, but they're good for Seattle.
They're good for Seattle. They're good for a lot of the cities that they end up going into. They do create a lot of jobs. And yes, there are the
talking
downsides.
about the warehouse jobs?
I'm talking not just about warehouse jobs, but when they expand. So when they were talking about the second headquarters, I mean, if that happened in New York, that would have been significant for them. And of course, they sandbagged it, fringe members of the left, while some more, not moderate, but mainstream Democrats are saying, whoa, slow your roll, AOC. I don't know what you're doing here. This is actually going to bring us a lot of revenue, which then we can put into the silly programs, the social programs that you want to install, instead of just automatically going after all the rich people. And by the way, Amazon creates a whole bunch of rich people because their engineers who end up working in these headquarters make mid-six figures. So this is just a higher tax base for you to exploit. But they don't understand it.
Right. And again, this is what I think the left doesn't understand this about this. Its base, and corporate America doesn't understand. They still have not reckoned with the crowds that flocked to Bernie Sanders. Because they were able to...
Who were in between Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump in 2016.
Yeah, but they were able to sort of paper over it with Clinton and Biden because they do still have this big base of boomers.
I'm shocked that Biden got the votes he got.
Yeah.
Because of how excited people were for Bernie Sanders and how unexcited people were for Joe Biden. Like, people were excited to beat Donald Trump, for sure. But I didn't really meet any Joe Biden super fans. I'm sure that we're going to raise a whole generation of them now. Yeah, well, I mean, you leave Eastern Market, which is a very nice neighborhood in Washington, D.C. I remember seeing posters for Buttigieg, posters for Bloomberg, and I was like, these houses are like, $1.7 million, 1.3, and I'm like, oh,
There they are.
there they are.
Yeah.
That is the Buttigieg and the Bloomberg fan base. Eastern Market.
I mean, look, this was a winnable election for Trump, who decided to lead into a horrible strategy, certainly in retrospect, of going after mail-in voting. He should not have done that. And I was saying at the time...
Or just never allow mail-in voting. But the federal government has no power over that.
You don't have any power. Now, I come from a state that is 100% mail-in voting. I enjoy that. It's just much easier
It's going
to
well.
actually get it done. It goes well when you give it enough time to actually create a system that works. Now, obviously, and I said this at the beginning of this, as someone who actually understands it took Washington about 10 years to get to where we are. This does not happen in a few weeks or a few months. You're not going to be able to get it done the right way. And I think Democrats smartly, from a strategic standpoint, pushed in, knowing it was going to cause some problems, but knowing that it would give them an advantage. So I think it was very clear that they were going to allow for mail-in voting in the states that are in contention. We knew it was going to happen. So the Trump team didn't pivot. They still said, after they knew we were going to get the mail-in voting system in place, don't do it. It's a scam. It's going to be filled with fraud. Just vote day of. That's not a good strategy when you're trying to simply get more votes than the other person. Because you know what? In Washington, I had 2 weeks to vote. Republicans who were listening to Trump had a day.
In addition to that, 2016, Donald Trump ran on build a wall, drain the swamp, no more foreign wars, end the illegal immigration in the United States. He ran on a strong platform. In 2020, he ran on the culture wars. And the culture wars was something he never shied from. I've been personally finding that very refreshing to see a politician that's willing to fight on any one of the culture wars, and they're attacking schools and sports, in the military, everywhere they're attacking. And he was willing to stand against that. But he didn't really outline a second-term agenda
I mean, you can't really do that during a pandemic, right? Like running on you can. I mean, I agree with you. It's refreshing that he ran on the culture war, but I think at the same time, his sort of like culture war approach in 2016 was against political correctness, and it was against all of these sort of like norms, et cetera, that just really doesn't work in the same way during a pandemic. And at the same time, like he did fine in the election, right? Like it wasn't a landslide defeat.
No, it
so
wasn't.
There was still an appetite for what, and
But
that's
as Ben
again,
Dominant says, he should have fired probably James Comey on day one, and then hot fired Dr. Fauci almost immediately, and that would have saved him years of distraction and trouble. But what did you get? Did you get a chance? I know you've been running around. I've seen you've been taking pictures of the National Guard downtown. You're up by the cathedral in DuPont. So I'm not sure. Did you get a chance to watch either his remarks, President's closing remarks last night, or his goodbye remarks to staff today?
I did.
What were your
watched
thoughts on
both.
those?
I thought it was interesting because my thoughts are always like the exact opposite of CNN. I put on CNN this morning just to hear how Jake Tapper would respond.
He was foaming at the mouth.
Oh my gosh, full of lies
Yes.
and
Lies.
puffery.
Deception.
I love the idea that so his farewell address is not supposed to be about a reflection on the last 4 years of his life in which he ran the country. Like he talked too much about himself in his farewell address to the nation. That's how it's supposed to go. I thought
That's
hit the right.
Obama's favorite thing to do.
It's
Trump gives him a run for his money on talking about
Yes.
himself.
I thought it was a good speech. I think he does so much better when he is more prepared and has a script where he's following, but then has some of his asides. I think he comes off as presidential when he talks like that, and I think if he did more of that over the course of the last 4 years and a little bit less tweeting or that style of approach in communication, he probably would have had a much easier chance at a second term. And I know that people push back on that because they say, well, what I loved about him were the tweets. And there's no doubt that played a huge role, certainly the first time around. But
Mika and Joe.
Yes, right.
Crazy Mika.
But there's a point where, you like that as a candidate, and then when you're the president, there is an expectation that you're going to pivot a little bit.
Yeah.
Now, I don't think you want Donald Trump to pivot completely because that's just not who he is, and you still want him to be organic. But I say this as someone who was really surprised because I didn't go into his candidacy when he ran as a huge Trump supporter. That was not the person I wanted. But I saw the pushback from the media and from Democrats starting the second he won, and I said, I'm now fighting for him. Like they pushed me to fight for Donald Trump.
By Florida, his enemy list was exactly my enemy list, and I thought, you might be all right.
I love that people have enemies lists just like I do.
You keep an enemies list?
I don't
Who
really.
doesn't? Do you not? We
I
have
don't
an
have a physical
ongoing
list.
bit in my show.
I have to pray for them.
Where I say the names and my producer writes them down. We have a huge book of people I hate.
A book?
Yeah, we have a book.
The book of hearty dislike.
It's part one. It continues every year. We update it.
Wow. Okay.
So, to the Twitter thing, I personally found it rather entertaining. Sometimes cringing. I mean, especially some of the WWF GIFs he would put out of him smashing CNN. Those were great years. But to exactly your point, I got to go during the election time, to New Hampshire, to Michigan, to Pennsylvania, to Ohio, to Wisconsin, to Minnesota, to all over, South Carolina, and talk to people. And basically, you could walk into a suburban cookout or a dive bar where people are taking shots after their shift at like noon. And people would say, they all think you might know the president because you're a reporter. And they say, could you tell him to just tone it down just a little? I think it's funny, but just tone it down. And this was basically everyone. You could be in a leather Knights of Columbus vest, or you could be in a Patagonia vest, and you had the same opinion.
What's funny is they'll tell you that, and I'll get similar comments from people, but they won't do it publicly. They won't post it on Twitter. They won't post it on Facebook, any of these sorts of criticisms. And the second I say it publicly, if I go on my show and I call out, even though I don't think it was an impeachable offense, but when I say the speech on January 6th was inappropriate and he mishandled that,
it was inappropriate.
The attacks that you get from Trump loyalists is so over the top. And
because so many people attack them all day, and they go to you to like...
It's reasonable.
Totally.
Oh.
And
reasonable.
I get it. Like
Yeah.
Intellectually, I understand, because every time I've offered a criticism of Trump, at least for me, it was delivered in good faith. When you get it on CNN, it's not delivered in good faith.
No.
It's delivered in the most
Bill
horrific,
Crystal.
odious faith possible. And so I understand that this inclination is to push back because, everyone else has been on the attack, but you shouldn't be blindly loyal to any politician.
Self-reflection's an important
Yes.
thing to have. I occasionally try it. It's ugly.
I don't like it. I do it once a year, and it's the most uncomfortable part. It's kind of like ayahuasca, where I just purge
Yeah.
at the end of it.
Yep.
But you're supposed to be able to do that, and I do think that Trump loyalists have to pull back a little bit, because what I'm sensing,
Especially now.
especially now, but they're still holding on to this idea that they have to punish the Republican Party, they have to punish Fox News because they called a
Purge.
state in a little bit too early for them. By doing that, you're not helping Trump, and you're not helping the values and principles that you hold dear. You're helping the Democrats, because that's how Democrats end up pushing really, really bad policies, is you go ahead and start attacking your own for simply being reasonable in criticism.
But there's some interesting aspects to the Fox viewership drop off, because I do definitely think that a lot of the people who are in the news department, some of whom have since departed, went tacked further to the left in an attempt to try and balance what they saw as opinion hosts that were too close to Trump. And they attacked the president repeatedly, sometimes unfairly, and sometimes from a point of view that was very far outside the good faith criticisms that you have. And viewers saw that, and viewers are more perceptive than a lot of New York programming officers and executives kind of give them credit for.
It's insulting.
It's really insulting, and they just turned it off on that last day. So I'm interested to see what the future holds for Fox News, because it seems like it really does, from the rumblings and the layoffs and the reshufflings, that they're aware that they're trailing CNN and MSNBC in ratings. I still think that if you're a viewer of television, Fox News is your best bet to get a center-right point of view by far.
A center point of view.
You can
Even
get
a center
every
point of view.
point of view
Absolutely.
by tuning into Fox News.
Yeah.
Because I think at least, when you have
Juan
Democrats
Williams.
on there, but when you have Democrats on there, again,
Jessica
they,
Tarloff.
I think, are better suited to talk to the audience and understand the audience that they're talking to than CNN. Because I don't think you get the condescending tone. You get a disagreement. But I think it's done still in good faith.
Yeah,
on
I'll be
Fox.
joining Marie Harf today. So turn on CNN, you're not going to see a Federalist senior editor and an Obama spokeswoman sitting next to each other.
Well, and let's end on this, because Jason, you have this is something you sort of have a front row seat to, and that is, I think, an underappreciated element of some of our national discord right now is related to the death of local media. And as somebody who's you're in the studio, you're hosting a local show every day, you're in communication with local people. What role do you think that plays particularly in all of this? Because people like Chris and I work in the national media. We never, I'm from Wisconsin. You're from wherever you're from.
Boston.
The third circle of hell. And
Boston's nice.
no, I know Boston's great. But anyway, and a lot of people like us in DC never worked their way through the local newsrooms. They never worked their way. They went to their fancy college and they moved to their fancy apartment building in DC or New York or LA, and that leaves a huge, I think, gap between the public and the people who are covering the crucial goings on that impact the public.
Did you go to a good school? I didn't go to a good school.
You did not. No, he did not go to a good school.
Where'd you go?
I went to American University, but
you
your options are limited when you get expelled from high school.
Yeah, poor guy.
I earned it. I don't regret it.
Yeah.
I went to Occidental, where Obama went for like a week
Oh,
and a half,
yeah.
and they are really milking that one.
Yeah. So what do you think on that question?
Yeah, so I mean, there's a lot to back there. So on the one hand, the power of local media, if you're doing it well, it teaches you to learn what people are thinking and how they feel about issues. And that's something that should be taken to the national stage, understanding who the audience actually is, not who you want them to be. That is aspirational and that is strategic on the management side, but who is your audience? Why do they hold the views that they hold? And when you're able to answer that question, you can talk to them in a much easier way. And I think that's why my show has been successful, my station has been successful, is because obviously it's easier because we're a conservative talk station. So we certainly know right off the bat who's listening. But a conservative in Washington is not your traditional
conservative talks like in the logo, right? I mean,
we own that brand, but conservative Seattle listener is much different than someone who lives in Sequim or Puyallup. They are a lot different. But the problem is when you're covering anything, especially on the TV side in local media, if you're in a one-party state or a one-party city, you can't piss off the people you need to have access to.
Right.
You have to be careful.
You do. And so you'll get cut off very quickly if you dare question something that Governor Jay Inslee says that they don't like. And for me, I don't need access to a single politician to do my job, because most of what I do analysis of what's out there, and that's based on me like reading bills that are being discussed, and I can give you my opinions. And then it's me doing my own reporting that's sort of a mix of the boring public disclosure requests where I find out stuff versus tips that people listen.
That's hard work. That's good journalism.
It's a lot of work. And, I'm a conservative talk show host, which means I'm not a reporter. I'm not a traditional journalist. But at least I sort of own it. I own my biases, and I own that I have a specific, end goal, and I print that when I write, and I say it when I'm on air. But when you have to be careful about how you approach stories, because you don't want to piss off the party in power, which has total control in our capital and on the council in Seattle, you're not delivering very good content, and you're not serving the audience, and then that means you're not really in tune with what they want, which is not just what Jake Tapper calls puffery. That's not what they want on some of these issues.
Hufflepuff.
Hufflepuff.
Where can people listen to the show, Jason?
So they can, if you get a podcast, wherever you get your podcast, just type in Jason Rantz and you'll be able to find it. And if you're in Western Washington, all of Western Washington, I'm on KTTH, which is AM 770, and 94.5 FM on the greater east side of like Bellevue, Issaquah, and East King County. So we are all over the place.
And where can people follow you on social media?
Jason Rantz on Twitter, and it's JSONRANTZ, and also on Instagram. I have a YouTube channel for when I do Fox News hits.
For now.
So for now, before they take me off. But all I do is post my Fox News hits there. So not too controversial.
Great. Well, thank you so much for taking the time.
This has been great.
Busy day to join us and talk through some of these issues.
Thank you for having me. I'm hopeful that the world has not come to an end while we chatted for this 45 minutes.
Yeah, we're going to check our phones and
a
find
merciful end.
Chris, do you have any final thoughts?
No, I was just thinking about the end of the world. It's getting excited.
Well, you've been listening to another edition of the Federalist Radio Hour. He's Chris Bedford, senior editor at the Federalist. We've been talking to Jason Rantz. I'm Emily Jashinsky, culture editor here at the Federalist. We'll be back soon with more. Until then, be lovers of freedom and anxious for the fray. We're good.
If this doesn't work, I'm practically face fucking this thing, or it's face fucking me.
No, it does
will
work.